Want to do better? Then it's time to change the story. Welcome to our show about new visions currently transforming the world through the confluence of art, tech, and innovation. And now your hosts, Michael Ashley and Neil Sahota.
Hey, welcome to another episode of Changing the Story. We've got a phenomenal guest today, Kelly Holland. In 2008, Kelly transitioned from a documentary filmmaker and journalist to become the managing director of Penthouse Entertainment and Broadcast, where she launched the most successful global broadcast empire in adult entertainment, ultimately acquiring Penthouse Global Media in 2016. 2018, she left Penthouse to launch a new company, Strategic Brand Connections, created to provide telehealth and tele-therapy products on a unique and proprietary technology platform. Let's see what's going on with Kelly. Kelly, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So Kelly, as a visionary, what is the story that you would like to bring to the world?
I'd like to talk about Strategic Brand Connections, which is the company that we are in the process of getting funded, which has two products, my intimacy coach and my recovery coach. I think those are both self-explanatory. And the fact that those two products evolved from a very strong sea change that has happened in the space I have traditionally been working in for many, many years, which is the adult space. In the adult space, we have a transition that's probably the most fundamental transition in the history of adult in terms of the relationship between performers and fans. And that also gave rise to the idea that people out there need to talk about things. They need to have a telehealth solution and a teleconsulting and counseling solution to talk about things that are very intimate to them.
Absolutely.
Well, so sorry. I mean, it's an interesting subject and it's something I definitely thought about. But before the show started, we were chatting about, Kelly used the word YouTubification of what's going on. It's like it's a trigger point for a lot of change here. I mean, Kelly, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So I've been working in the adult space for quite some time. As I said, it came out of being a war zone journalist, which is a pretty unexpected transition, but there it is. And traditionally, the business compact that performers had with their fans was moderated by the studios, right? So first, long ago and far away, we had the peep shows. Most people can't remember that. And then we had the actual film, 16 millimeter, 35 millimeter films in what I like to call the Pussycat Theater era. Then we transitioned to VHS tape, which was a big transition. But the relationship between fans and the studios producing the content for the fans and the performers remained the same. And then what was changing was technology, right? So VHS to DVD to online, and online had a pretty strong undercurrent of change with it. But that relationship still remained the same in terms of there were three parties that were involved in this process. What's changed radically over the last couple of years, and it really, I would say, hit full force during the COVID lockdown because performers could no longer show up on sets and do intimate scenes. So really what has come to the forefront is that performers now, through new technology platforms, can have direct relationships with their fans. And it's, I won't say it's completely made the studios obsolete, but it has moved them to a secondary position. And so now, for example, just to, rather to talk with hyperboles about what this is, I'll give you perfect examples. A performer, Demi Sutra, great performer, would show up on set. She'd be working for any number of studios, and there'd be a director on that set, and she'd make a movie, and then that movie and she'd be paid that day for her performance, and then that movie would be distributed in a wide variety of distribution outlets. Okay, now COVID happens. Demi Sutra can stay at home and through primarily a platform called OnlyFans, she can create her own little theater where she can post her content. Her fans can join and pay a monthly membership. They can also talk to her. They can ask for very specific content, euphemistically known as custom videos. They can ask for relationships in text or by phone. They can ask for kind of that girlfriend experience where I know a performer who's currently doing that. So the ability to interact with their fans in a personalized way has now gotten to the point where performers don't really care that the industry shut down. And many of them have said, hey, I ended up staying home and realizing I'm making a lot more money doing this and dealing directly with my fans and messaging directly. So I'm controlling my product. I'm controlling my persona, as opposed to a studio doing that. So it's a very, very different iteration. And the studios have basically been replaced by those technology platforms that this interaction sits on.
This is a fascinating subject for a lot of reasons. But I want to go back to what you said there. I was actually thinking about this a lot lately because of what's going on in Hollywood, the idea that they can't really be on set, they can't shoot. And I was wondering what was going on with the adult industry because of obviously it's even more intimate when it comes to the adult industry. And I was wondering how this was playing out. When you talk about this, what comes up to my mind is power. So if you're thinking about that star that you mentioned earlier, it seems like she's disenfranchised in the sense that, she works for the studio. The studio tells her where to go. They get a big cut of this when it occurs, but she is at the whim of them. But what it seems like we're talking about is the platformization of these stars. Because it's not so much, Vivid or whatever industry you want to talk about, whatever brand, it's now about the particular star. And so she doesn't have to deal with it. Someone telling her where to be on set or them getting a bigger cut than this person. She gets to do it her way. And in a lot of ways, it reminds me, I was listening to this thing on YouTube yesterday about they call the intellectual dark web. These are people like Ben Shapiro and Weinstein. And they're talking about this idea that it's now about the individual as opposed to, let's say, the New York Times. And so to me, it seems like this is a good thing in the sense it's giving the power to the star, to the individual, and that they can do what they like with it. Especially, they're also more responsive to their fans as well.
Yeah, and I'll say a couple of things. I'll go back to what's Hollywood doing and what's the adult industry doing. So I'm president of the trade organization for the adult industry, which is called Free Speech Coalition. And I don't speak for Free Speech Coalition. I put that disclaimer out there right away. However, the minute we are the organization that will call a shutdown in the industry if someone were to test for HIV. It's been a lot of press, New York Times, Boston Globe, LA Times. A lot of people have done articles on the adult industry and said, hey, we should look to the adult industry because they've been testing, contact tracing, and have had a system in place for many, many years to do exactly what we're now trying to roll out. And they're quite right on that. So we called a production hold in the very early days. And I can say we weren't extremely popular in the beginning, but then everybody really understood the need for that. We have been paralleling mainstream Hollywood. So we've been watching what mainstream Hollywood does and how they're going to reopen. And I can tell you from people deep inside that bubble that the theory is, let's let the indies go out first and be the canary in the coal mine and see what happens. Of course, everything is changing. I would say on a daily basis, but I'll almost say now on an hourly basis, based on rates of transmission out there, who's spiking. And so production is open for business. Both in Hollywood, mainstream Hollywood, and the adult industry. We have studied protocols for 3 months in terms of disinfecting and sterilizations and testing. We have for those people who have chosen to work. And the Free Speech Coalition doesn't say work, don't work. We just say we're going to give you all the best information we've got out there, and the producers are going to make choices, but hopefully very smart choices. So in the great hinterland of adult filming, homeowners are tested, houses are fogged with disinfectant foggers. I mean, I think actually the adult industry is going to lengths that even mainstream is not going to. And that's not necessarily because of the intensity of the intimacy, because mainstream Hollywood, people can get very, very close and simulate things, and they're just as vulnerable. But I think just because the adult industry has been so acutely working, and Free Speech Coalition has been so acutely working in the public healthcare sphere for so long, So that's what's happening in reality. And that's why I know that now that production has started to edge out, put their toe in the water, I know that some performers are saying, not now, I don't need it. And you know what? Maybe never. Now, I'll say a couple of things about maybe never. You know, just like YouTube influencers and just like the music industry, if you choose to sort of disengage from a studio, you still have to figure out how to message. So young performers, I think, are still served very well by the studio system because it builds their career and builds their fan base to a certain point that they can step out there. But for performers who are already established, it has much to recommend it. Inside the adult industry, we're also, as is all industry right now, we're also dealing with issues of race and racism. In the adult industry, we trade in taboo and trope. And because we trade in taboo and trope, we have a lot of dialogue that has to happen, primarily with our communities of color. They need to make the decisions about how they want to present themselves. But when a performer goes out and decides to have that relationship with a fan directly, then they can choose how they want to present themselves. And that gives them an amazing freedom. It also gives them, I could get into a whole side wrap on the Me Too movement and sexual harassment, which does happen. And people go, wait a minute, performers have sex for a living. I mean, I've heard 3 people say that to me in the last 2 days in talking about a particular performer that was recently arrested, a very famous performer, Ron Jeremy. There's sexual harassment. I said, listen, just because a performer chooses to have sex for a living does not mean that you have the right to go touch them without asking permission. So what are you thinking? So it also goes a long way to address that because they get to make the choices about who they're going to work who they're going to work with. And they're not subjected to directors who sometimes will bring them on set and say, this is the scenario. And then they get to set and maybe that's expanded a little bit, or maybe they need to, well, can't you just do that? That stuff can't happen within that environment of performers being their individual career builders.
Well, it sounds like, empowerment and control has a lot of good benefits for the individual, helping hopefully reduce sexual harassment and, things around diversity and inclusion. I'm kind of curious though, because your phrase of YouTubization was so great. Is this also kind of opening up the door where you had, a set of very professional performers, and now in theory you could have anyone try and jump into this space?
Oh, listen, I'm asked to answer constantly. So I sit on panels talking about being a woman in the industry, which was rare when I got in the industry, and was obviously very unheard of when I bought Penthouse. There were a lot of people that were really affronted that I would buy and run a brand that was an iconic brand that was such a man's brand. I would say that when I go out to speak on panels, I'm always asked, but what about this horrible thing I saw? And what about this, amazingly misogynistic act that I saw? And I always say, look, I can't be responsible for every knucklehead in Kansas or Iowa that's doing something with his girlfriend that he's not supposed to do. And those guys are out there. Those girls are out there. Everybody. Yes, it's the dilemma we all face right now, including Zuckerberg, huh? Right?
Yep.
We all thought it was the great, democratization of thought and speech, and it's become to some extent the tyranny of thought and speech. And yes, all of that can happen. And as the president of Free Speech Coalition, I struggle with this constantly because we could answer very directly to our 150 performers and our 40 directors and our 20 studios back when that traditional model existed. we look now to how we can be relevant to those millions of cam girls out there, or hundreds of thousands perhaps around the world. How do we become relevant to them? How can we solve their problems? And it has its own set of issues and exploitations that happen. We can't answer for it. As I said, we can't answer for all of that. We can only answer for what we do and what we try to touch and how we try to be responsive to those situations.
So from a technical standpoint, for people that aren't familiar with this phrase, the YouTubification of the sex industry, what does this look like in terms of what is the experience? Let's say you're a male or a female, you find this site. Walk us through what this experience is like and how it differs from what we've seen in the past.
Absolutely. So this relationship is not so very, very new. It is evolving. So originally there was something, it's been around for quite some time, 10, 12 years, the cam girls, right? If I say cam girl to you, do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
right. Sure. So these massive platforms, there's 4 or 5 that really dominate globally the landscape. And as a cam girl, you may say, okay, I'm in college and I'm in class for 6 hours a day. I get home at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It's going to kill me if I have to go work a 3 to 11 job or a 3 to 12 job. So I'm going to be a cam girl. So I sign up on a platform because I know many of the owners. I won't say a name because then the other 4 owners will say, why didn't you mention us? So they'll go sign up for a big cam platform. And this stuff is, these platforms, there's 3 really big ones in the United States that deal primarily with US performers. So let's look at them. And that cam girl, all she has to have is a relationship like this. She has to have a camera and a quiet place in her dorm or in her room, in her house with her roommates, or she can close the door and she sits there. And if you talk to cam girls, they'll tell you the downfall is that it's really boring because you sit there and you're just like doing your nails and you're messing around and you're waiting. You can see when someone logs on to look at you. They don't even have to talk to you. They don't have to give you a dime. You just know when someone else logged on to watch you. And that's what's happening in a cam girl experience. What changed and really moved, so I'm gonna back up just a little bit. So doing adult movies became almost a lost leader for a cam girl, right? So she would create her name and get some notoriety out there by doing a movie. But then, of course, she stood to make a lot of money as a cam girl if she was really willing to sit there and chat with people. And then in a cam experience, you chat with a whole room full of people, 20, 30, 40, and then one will do what's called taking you private. So he'll pay or she'll pay more money, and then you'll go into a private experience with them, which is maybe 10 minutes. I could talk about why it's actually about 7 minutes. I could talk about why it's 7 minutes, but we won't get biological at this point. And it's about 7 minutes, and then she'll come back out into that open environment. That is a classic cam experience. What changed in the last few years with the fan experience is that all of a sudden she still had to sit atop a particular platform, and there's one that dominates all of the others, but there are now many of them that sit out there where that girl can log on and she can do a Skype show with you. She can mainly just text back and forth, and you say, hey, Jane, I saw that movie you did a couple of years ago and that thing that you did, in the garden, and it was so hot. I'd love to see something like that. And can you make it personal? And she'll go shoot a little scene with her 4K iPhone. That's we follow technology, right? So everybody follows technology. So now you've got 1 million producers out there because they all have 4K iPhones and people are doing feature films with those. So she'll go out in the garden and she'll shoot whatever she's going to shoot, and she'll use your name. She'll say, hey, Neil, this is for you, boom. And Neil's going to pay, I don't know, $30 or $40 or whatever he's going to pay for that. So that is an individual content producer, an individual performer, and she's establishing a relationship with you. And that relationship can be much broader than it can in a cam environment. In a cam environment, there's pretty much just chatting. You're either chatting to a group or you're chatting to one person. In that fan environment, you are doing, a lot of it's doing custom videos. You're doing individual private Skype shows. You're doing a big Skype show where everybody can pay $5, or if you're subscribing to her channel, then you get it for free. She's DMing you or you're DMing her.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a much more personal relationship. Now let's talk about why. No, wait, you asked me why. Why is this so popular, Kelly?
Oh, why is this so popular, Kelly?
That is so reflective, and equally the reflection of why Facebook is Facebook and why YouTube is YouTube. You know, we live in such and also gave rise to strategic brand connections to a very large degree. We live in such an amazingly isolated world, right? Mm-hmm. There's so many people out there that are disconnected, particularly millennials. I don't mean to rag on millennials, but you know, if they could just sit in their house and have everything brought through the door. And they're actually the perfect guys to have gotten through COVID, I'll tell you, because they don't want to go out, right? It's just video game, Grubhub's coming, that's it, don't bug me. And then I've got, of course, OnlyFans and cam girls on the side here. But you know, I like to say that we live in this interesting world where in Facebook we have, you know, 1,000 fans or friends, 1,000 friends, 2,000 faux friends. We don't know most of them. Mm-hmm. I always say your real friend is the one that's going to come down to Compton and help you fix your tire when it blows at 3:00 in the morning. That's a friend. But we have this illusion of a tribe and this illusion of all these friends through Facebook, and they all wish us happy birthday, even though we don't know who they are. But we don't know, by the way, the guy living to the left of us, and we don't know the guy living to the right of us, nor do we want to know them, because that's super messy, mm-hmm. right? That's like, oh God, what if they're weird? Or, oh no, what if they come over here and I don't want, you know, then that's an actual relationship, and that can be sticky and messy. So we don't know anybody that's real around us. We just have these sort of wonderful, wonderful virtual relationships, which we can easily get out of if they become uncomfortable, because I can just block you. So you take that as a starting point. We all live in this massive isolation. We watch, you know, international news, which reminds us constantly that we're one of, you know, 30 billion or 12 billion or however many billion are on the planet. We're just some ant, one more ant in the chain. And we become more and more disconnected. So I believe that Facebook understood it, YouTube understands it as a platform for communication, and certainly the adult industry, which deals in the most primal space possible, which is that's your reptile brain, your sexual urges. Either some thinker sat down and thought about it and went, this would be a good idea, or we all just sort of fell into it as the natural cultural technology or technological evolution. And so I think that we will continue down that path. I believe that somewhere sitting off in the future is an increasing move to a more virtual experience, yes, but an experience that is enhanced with pleasure products and more sort of tactile AI relationships. I'm not talking about having sex with a doll either. I'm just talking about the fact when I say tactile AI relationships, I'm talking about the fact that we already have the ability to have pleasure products. It's what we euphemistically call toys, whether those be vibrators or dildos or whatever. The products already exist that would allow you to be in Dubai tomorrow and have a girlfriend in Chicago, and the two of you could get online and be looking at each other, and she could have a toy and you could be controlling her toy, and you could have a toy and she would be controlling that. And you'd have this sort of clunky at the moment, virtual experience that had a tactile component to it. I think that will become more and more elegant as technology does, as we move along, and more ubiquitous. It already exists a little bit in the cam girl world. Cam girls if you would like, I could just tell you a funny story. There is a particular toy, it's a vibrator, and the vibrator responds to sound. So cam girls have these vibrators, and they'll get a show where they have a lot of guys in the room, and when a fan tips, a little bing goes off. So the more people that are tipping, and consequently bing, 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 and it's getting louder and louder, the more the vibrator's like speeding up. So that's like a little cute game that everybody plays. Anyway, there are applications that are already out there, and they're really commonly held. But I think that as we move down the line, we'll see much more sophistication in that. And is it a good thing? I don't know. We'll all be Wall-E when it's over, but
That's what I was wondering about, because with emerging technology, I mean, a lot of people always talk about virtual reality, but we have haptics now where we can actually transmit sensation to the body. And, at least in the VR, XR, we keep talking about the different worlds of reality. Do you think we're actually moving towards the adult industry becoming like a total virtual personalized experience?
Yes. And I tend to believe that a lot of life, not just the adult industry. I think the adult industry at times leads, at times follows. It used to lead on technology, but technology is so sophisticated, to translate expensive, that it's hard for studios to make huge commitments. They can't make the same commitment to a technology that NASA can make, right? They didn't have to back in the past because they were dealing in a much more low-tech world that was much more accessible. Yeah, and like everything in life that's sophisticated, people bother to look at, there's good sides and bad sides. I think we continue to increase and enhance our ability to disconnect personally. I think for some people that is a positive. Mm-hmm. Listen, I used to have these conversations, I'd be on these debate panels with feminists that were horrified at what I did and challenged me about how I could possibly call myself a feminist and be involved in the adult industry. It's a whole other topic. And people, religious leaders and people, and I would always just come back to a basic, which was, this is about watching adult content. And I would always just say, do you actually begrudge the guy who doesn't have a girlfriend, who doesn't have has not had a sexual experience in a year or 2 or 10? Do you actually begrudge him the ability to masturbate? Like how mean-spirited and orthodox are you? That would usually shut everybody up. But there are a whole lot of people that are isolated that for whatever reason can't connect personally or have a hard time connecting with people personally. So we give them a technology that allows them to just go deeper into that space, but at least allows them, when they do go deeper, to find that kind of faux relationship in that space. So are we doing them a favor or are we doing them a disservice? I don't know. Part of my intimacy coach as a product is to actually have people in a completely anonymous environment where we're going to be very careful with their information because it's very sensitive information. That's part of having those conversations because we're all, we're in this huge world. And how many billion people on this planet at this point?
Almost 8.
8. Yeah. Thank you, Neil. This huge, mass of 8 billion people living in 8 billion bubbles, right? Mm-hmm. So for many, 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 many people, with every bit of technology we give them, and even with the technology, that YouTubification of the adult experience, even with that, and all the opportunities and all the, apps and the dating apps, they feel more disconnected than they've ever felt. Therein lies, that's the question that needs to be answered.
Well, I think, that's a very good question. My wife and I were talking about this recently. There was a movie that we watched. In fact, there was a few movies that we watched that were talking about, what it's like for young people to have this basically sex on demand, with, you mentioned earlier the peep shows. We talked about the 16 millimeter prints. At this point, it's beyond just a magazine. You can get on your phone and have access to anything. And so we were wondering, because we have 2 young children, I mean, what this does in terms of desensitivity to seeing all this content. You know, do you because you have access to it, and we lose the thrill, the physical thrill of being with somebody, of going on a date, of being truly intimate. And so you're talking about the atomization of the planet, and I think we're especially feeling it right now with COVID. We've heard of things like Zoom fatigue. And even though I could talk to somebody, to your example, in Dubai, it doesn't mean that I feel great at the end of that conversation like I might feel if this person was next to me. In some ways it's nice, but it feels like a poor substitute. And I wonder, when you start talking about virtual reality, and I start thinking about that example, the person that's has access to someone in Chicago, someone in Dubai, and maybe we have haptics that are wonderful. It reminds me of Ready Player One, where we can feel anything, right? We can see anything. But I wonder if we're looking at this from a philosophical point of view, at the end of the day, does this satiate our human need, not just sexually, but really for human connection? Are we really connecting with other people if we can have all these wonderful sexual experiences, especially if we're, let's say, a male that doesn't have access to an attractive female, but desperately wants that? If they begin to have these wonderful experiences that they might not otherwise, are we then fulfilling, let's say, their soul? Are they having that deep connection? What are your thoughts about that?
Absolutely, to all of the above. And that is a huge set of complexities that we could talk about for 8 hours and probably 8 years. I will tell you what's missing in a lot of this. I like to fancy myself, at least what I'm interested in reading and studying is sort of our primal motivators, right? And I never did online dating ever. And why? Because I felt there was one key component that was missing, which was smell. And we know, as anthropologists and biologists and primalists will tell you, that we're attracted by smell. We can sense each other's DNA and decide if you're a good match. If your DNA is very divergent from mine, that means we're going to have really strong offspring. And did you know that that's why people kiss? That's the theory about kissing, is that it was we sense people's DNA through smell, but we also through kissing. That was where kissing started, was to actually have that touch and that exchange of saliva to test DNA. So we miss things like that. We also miss the very real necessity for tactile experience. We all probably, if anybody took a Psych 101 class, we remember the experiments of the baby monkeys that were separated from their mothers at birth. They were given, warm milk and everything else that they needed, but they didn't have the touch of a mother. And so they died. And so, yeah, that is a massive problem. You talked about being a father. And yes, I can't stress enough to people that if your sexual education comes from watching video, your parents aren't doing their job. That is I say, we are no more your sexual educators with content than the Fast and the Furious is a driver's ed class. Not the same. Don't try this at home. We should have disclaimers, hey, don't try this at home. In a vacuum where, unfortunately, our political system doesn't, in many cases, in certain states, allow for real sex ed at age appropriate, which should frankly start at, second or third grade, age appropriate. You are left for kids to come and look at adults and think that that's what it is. And I have seen that over my years in adult, and I'll try to pick my words cautiously here. When I first got into the adult business, and also I was dating, and I was not so old at that time that I couldn't remember my earlier dating life. I don't think anybody ever thought that that when you pull out for an orgasm, that happens on a girl's face. That was nothing. That was not a thing. There's not a bit of content you can see now where that doesn't happen. And to the point that now if you talk to young men, they're like, well, know what we're supposed to do? No, And talk to any 20-year-old woman out there, and she's like, yeah, they always want to, they learn that from adult. They learn that from the adult space. Mm-hmm. And I say this to my colleagues and my peers all the time. If you think that we're just some little frivolous bonbon to just a little sweet to just take a bite and then it's gone, do not think that. Mm-hmm. You are changing the culture at a very basic, critical level, sometimes for the good, sometimes for the bad. I think that we have gone a long way to help LGBTQ, right? Transgender, different relationships that are not sexually defined or defined in terms of just a relationship in the traditional way. And we've gone a long way to make people comfortable talking about that, particularly in the sexual space. I'll tell you a very quick story and what I mean by this, and this goes back to feminists always like, how can you do this? No. So Penthouse, at the time that I was there and I created its global broadcasting, we had channels everywhere. And that went from Israel to Turkey to Africa to all of Latin America. And we're putting out content and a message that is going to peoples, cultures, religions, customs everywhere. So I went to Turkey, to Istanbul, to meet with my broadcasters there. And they were the two major broadcasters in Turkey at the time. And one was the state-run Digiturk. And I went during Ramadan, and I would go out to the main mall in the afternoon when everybody was coming out to break their fast. And I would sit there, and it was in the middle of the old town. And I would just contemplate the fact that the channels were on from midnight to 5 a.m. That at midnight every night in Old Town, in all these historic buildings that were apartments, there would be a man at midnight taking off his clothes. The call to prayer would be ringing out from the 4 mosques that circled the Old Town. A woman would be taking down her hijab and dropping her burqa, and they would get in bed and have sex, and she would look over her shoulder at what we were making. And that is disruptive. And I have a company called Disruptive Propaganda because of that. That is the most disruptive kind of revolutionary message that you can send. Forget the left, the right, the socialist, the Democrat, the fascist, forget all of that stuff. If you can make change at that level and say to a woman who has lived in a certain culture and climate for 2,000 years that no, women should enjoy themselves, and women can have fun, and women don't need to apologize, and women, their value is not their virginity. Mm-hmm. That's profoundly radical. Needless to say, the channels are no longer there because it got more conservative in Turkey. But so it has the ability, these things, and back to your kids, it has the ability to make profound change, to create a space for people who are disconnected, lonely, who may believe they're dysfunctional, who may believe that, we were talking earlier about people who, the man who's been going to work on the assembly line for 30 years, but he secretly cross-dresses and thinks that he's broken. Mm-hmm. He's not broken. 15% of men cross-dress. And I don't think most men know that the chance is that there's someone else in the room that's cross-dressing. We tell you that, and we tell you it's okay, and we say you're not broken. That's not something that has to be cured. What needs to happen is you need to come to a peaceful acceptance of it, and then you need to decide if you want to communicate to your partner, because she may have something that she's never communicated to you. Think about this. I make no presumptions on your relationship. But I will tell you, I have talked to many women in Los Angeles, very sophisticated, one of the most sophisticated cities in the world. These are women in their 30s and 40s who would, after they got to know me and got to know what I talked about, they would say, I love my husband. I really do. He's an amazing provider, and he's a wonderful father, and he holds my hair when I'm sick and I'm throwing up in the sink, and he takes the trash out. He does all the great things. He laughs at my jokes when they're not funny. but well. And then she will dance around and I'll say, what? Well, just the sex is like boring. Okay, if the sex is boring, then you say, okay, then I don't have to tell me the rest of the story. I know the rest of the story. It's that you're not having orgasms. Have you ever told him that? No. Why not? This is a person you sleep with. This is a person you had children with. Why can you not tell him what's going on? It would destroy him. Mm-hmm. There's such a failure to be able to communicate the most basic, the most intimate, the most essential issues to the person closest to you. Mm-hmm. And that goes on. I'm not suggesting with you, but that goes on, and it goes on a lot. And that was a lot of the thinking that even when I was at Penthouse, I was consumed by building this brand. But I left because I just felt there was such an important need to help and facilitate people to talk to each other, mm-hmm. and to talk about what was most intimate and in a non-confronting, non-undermining way. Mm-hmm. And it's everywhere. Every time I do a radio show, I get the same call-ins from people. I love my wife, but she's a little heavy and she doesn't feel good about her body, so she doesn't want to have sex. And it's like, okay, how can we communicate to her that it's not about that? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot to be done out there in all of these conversations. And that's what goes on in that fan space a lot too, is you've got men who are asking performers, how do I tell my partner about this? Mm-hmm. How do I manage that? Mike, I have a particular person that I work with that does a lot of fan stuff. And she had a client who said, I'm gonna get my kids watching a movie downstairs because I want to come upstairs and put on some panties and send you a picture. That's what's going on in the homes around America, but people can't talk, they can't indulge because, we come from this, Victorian mm-hmm. Christian background that doesn't allow us to do that. I think I probably got off of new technology with that, but whatever. This new technology is responding to that.
Absolutely.
There's a lot to unpack there, from the treatment, the education, diversity, inclusion, sexual harassment, the changing of the industry.
Big topics.
I feel like we could be actually talking for hours, but Kelly, I think people will want to learn more. What's the best way for them to see what you're up to, understand what's happening, understand the latest? What's the best way to get a hold of you?
Oh dear. Well, now you're talking to someone who talks about technology and futurism, who is a total Luddite that never has a moment to keep her social media up. chickmedia.com is the website, and it's got all my social on it, and you can hit me up there for sure.
I will make sure to post that on the show notes for our audience. And okay. Kelly, thank you for sharing your story. This has been a fascinating conversation, and I don't know about how Michael feels, but I think we'd love to bring you back and continue the discussion.
Absolutely. Very enlightening. And I love that we bounced from technology to humanity and everything in between. So thank you very much, Kelly.
And if we can't bounce from technology to humanity, we're lost on both sides, right?
Oh,
that's
the
bridge is the important part of it all. So, all right, guys, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.
Hey, if you like today's show, please remember to hit the like button and leave a comment.
If you've been enjoying the Changing the Story podcast series, please subscribe and share it with your friends.
Thank you.